So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then, we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste from many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, let's then understand sections of the holy instructions and the relation with the autumn feast found then in Revelation, and also found in Yeshayahu, the 65th and 66th chapter, the very prophet that the nation unfortunately slaughtered because they did not have the spirit of prophecy. So then, let's make an analysis of the importance of understanding prophecy, because the same murdering spirit that was in the nation, the same murdering spirit is at work during these modern times. So Yeshayahu the prophet was extremely important prophet because he was able of having a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He, where then he did understand the structuring of the holy instructions and the holy feasts, and the holy feasts linked up with very important events during the time of the promised Mashiach, and also during the time of the autumn feast. So people these days, as they are treating life as disposable, during the time of the Mashiach, he was the promised prophet related with Mehoshua, or then Moses, because the relationship the Hamashiach ben Yosef had with Yod-He Vav-He brought a lot of people to anger, because people read the scripture in a certain way because they are bound during a specific periods of time. They are in this stuck position of understanding the scripture in a certain way. So if you would take the text today and give it to the people 100 years ago, the outcome of the understanding would be a whole lot distinct. So we are speaking of times and seasons. So then, because of the relationship with Yod-He Vav-He, requires then a humble state of mind of quickly hearing and slow to speak. That's what then the words of the Shilishim and also the Mashiach himself. He was simply explaining, be cautious, not become critical before understanding the spirit of prophecy. So the Hamashiach ben Yosef was very clear when he spoke of the people being blind, and he spoke these precisely because the Mashiach was explaining the relationship with the prophecies and the events of the future and the structuring step-by-step formation until the time of the end spoke of in Yeshayahu the 24th chapter. Now the Hamashiach ben Yosef was put to death because people thought he was interpreting the scripture in a certain way. So mostly the nation, because of the ignorance of the spirit of prophecy, they have murdered their own prophets. So today, the same murdering spirit that was during the time of the Mashiach and the prophets, the murdering spirit is present during this time of the restoration period. And truly it is amazing the lack of a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He and Golah, or the revelation. You can't have a spirit of revelation without a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He and his facet of Ava. We must be humble before him so he can give us the step-by-step formation of his own structuring of the holy feasts. So it is so plain and obvious. The sound of the shofars are obviously celebrated during the time of the autumn feast. So tabernacling, for instance, this month, extremely important, the Feast of Tabernacles. Also extremely important, the time of the end related with Feast of Autumn. So Yom Kippur was realized during a period of time where sin was then eliminated from the nation. So the time of the end and the coming of Yod-He Vav-He as then Shaphat, or then the judge, he comes and eliminates sin. So there is a direct relation with the feast of Yom Kippur. Now when evil spirits are in people, they don't understand this. And when the truth is spoken, then they have the same murdering spirit that were in the nation when they destroyed their own prophets, including the promised the Hamashiach ben Yosef. And then as an excuse, then they point the finger as interpretation. The same thing then the people of the law did when the Mashiach was explaining who he was. Because the people of the law lacked a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He, and the Hamashiach ben Yosef had a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He, and they couldn't get in a way that would satisfy their own lusts for power. Then they murder him as the same spirit murdered the prophets previously. So understanding the scripture is extremely important, having a very fine balance, so then we don't find ourselves only studying a language secularly with second intentions of only having benefits. The spirit of Yod-He Vav-He in Golah speaks primarily of a relationship with Yod-He Vav-He as Ava. It's the first relationship with the Son in Ava. When you have a relationship with your earthly fathers, it has to have some sort of a respect. Children sometimes don't have the understanding of life. So lovingly they must direct them. Now if a kid is hard-headed, wants to take a position in life that doesn't line up with what the father or then the family is leading towards as far as the way of life, obviously they're going to wreck their lives at some point. This is what the nation did when they destroyed their own prophets. Every time they did not listen to their prophets, they wrecked their own lives. They were in exile, they were beat up, they were taken out of the land, they were stolen from. And Yod He Vav He is very specific, related with a relationship first, and then the understanding of the scripture. Now, there are extremes. It can be an extreme on one way, it can be the extreme on the other way. But the Hamashiach ben Yosef was bringing relationship with Yod He Vav He in his facet of Galah. This truly is the spirit of revelation. Now, when people read the scripture on their own, only because they understand the language, understanding the language does not give you spiritual understanding. On the contrary, because they use the language as a means of benefit. But the spirit of prophecy spoken of by the prophets themselves, what Shaliach Shaul or then Paul was speaking of, a spirit of prophecy, was precisely the spirit that were in the prophets. And those prophets were murdered. And Yod He Vav He, in his understanding, was saying this is a very hard nation to deal with. That's why they were exiled so many times. Because they want the world to run in a certain way, and it won't. So then, having an understanding, a humble understanding, is bringing information, materials, so then Yod He Vav He can begin showing the people his structuring. So then we can identify events during this time of the restoration and also during the time of the autumn feast. Now, people don't study the Holy Feast, they won't understand in a certain way. They don't take the time to study. And interestingly, when they hear a person talking, then they become critical. So then, what was the Hamashiach ben Yosef speaking so strongly that led to his death? What Amos did, what Yeshayahu did, Yirmiyahu did, Daniel did, Ezekiel did. Except for a very few, the great majority of these holy representatives of Yod He Vav He, and a lot of them, they had flaws in their lives. Yet they were chosen for a very specific objective, and they had a very strong relationship with Yod He Vav He, and people around hate them because they couldn't have the same relationship. It shows a murdering tongue, a murdering spirit from behind. In a spiritual level, they place dynamites everywhere. So it is amazing the lack of a relationship with Yod He Vav He in the spirit of teaching, spirit of being humble. It's not the language that brings enlightenment. It's not learning only the language. The language is dry. The law without the relationship, without the spirit of Yod He Vav He, is death. Shaliach Shaul was very clear regarding the understanding of the scripture without the spirit and the relationship with Yod He Vav He. Without him is absolutely death. it is dry, it is boring. That's why some people sometimes when they glance at the Hebrew, they have shivers, because they are not being taught with a loving understanding in the relationship with Yod He Vav He Ava. So then, when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was speaking of a blind state of his people, he's not talking about not understanding the Torah. That's not the point. Though the Mashiach had to teach from A to Z because of so many takanots and maasim and laws generated by the Jews, they had nothing to do with Yod He Vav He told through Moses. They were making laws on their own. And the Mashiach came in and put a stop in it. That's why those people are hard to deal with, because they don't have a relationship with Yod He Vav He. Whatsoever they put their hands on is with a second thought of a benefit of some sort. Not being judgmental, only being factual. So then, most of the people who are in the Holy Land, they are not from the lineage. Those are cloned Europeans. They are not from the original people. If we read, for instance, the writings of Yashar, you find then the writings of Malach Tzaddik, you find the writings of Revelation. Watch the color of their skin. They are not white. They are people of the region of the East in Northern Africa. These are the original people. And they are from amongst the Syrians and Egyptians and Libyans in the region of the Northern Africa. So the Holy Nation is repleted with a contaminated teaching from Europeans. Well, let me ask you this: where do you find a lineage and from the people, the originals from the northern section of Africa and Libya, where do you find people with very light eyes, blue, or these are Europeans? They are not from the Holy Land. So when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining those people who are claiming to be Jews but they are not Jews, the Mashiach is explaining there are people that they have the law but they have no relationship. And then at the very end he say, oh, we did this, that, and the other in your name, thinking Yod He Vav He, but when he said never knew you, he said you never had a relationship. You only went with the law, and the law brings death. So then, there are extremes. You can't go only on the point of the law. Neither can only going on the point of relationship. It has to have a balance. The Hamashiach ben Yosef had a balance. He knew the law perfectly, and he had the perfect relationship with Yod He Vav He, and he was teaching them both. Now, without the spirit of prophecy and the relationship, the writing is dead. the galaying or the gala in forward motion, the writings of this second portion of the feasts, the holy feasts of Vaikra, we only have those today because it was preserved in a Greco language. So there are some important points related with the Greco writing, the Greco translation, because without it we would not have any idea the development of this second portion of the holy feasts. So then, why was the Hamashiach so strong? And was himself talking as a person, or was Yod-Heh Vav-Heh himself in his facet of Galah, speaking with his own people and didn't listen to him? And then they say they are doing these entire services for him, and they are not. They are doing these in vain. They are only gaining the trust of the world for their own benefit. So, granted, not every person in the Holy Land is like this. There are some very strong Europeans who are 100% dedicated, and they have a relationship with Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. But the great majority, they are Europeans, foreigners. They are only there because of the benefit. No other reason. In fact, they treat Yod-Heh Vav-Heh as then a service boy. And most often when these people are around the world, they only bring war. Because they have no spirit of being a person that is humble. They don't bring a spirit of understanding. They don't bring a spirit of prophecy. They only bring disaster and war. So we should be very balanced in our understanding, based from Yod-Heh Vav-Heh and Galah, his own words through the prophets, indicating a primary relationship with him. That's why then Shaliach Shaul many times said, be cautious only with the law. The law brings death. Without the spirit of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, Galah so reveals it is death. That's why then Shaliach Shaul, based from the lack of a relationship, what is the use of practicing the feasts? What is the use of the every lunar view? What is the use of practicing the feasts as far as Sukkah or then Shavuot, if there is not a relationship with Yod-Heh Vav-Heh? It is in vain. So this was the tone that Shaliach Shaul or Paul used it. Now, is one more important than the other? No, both of them are important. You can't only live by relationship because it lacks the library of the structuring of the prophecies. Otherwise, then the spirit of prophecy tries to direct the people and they don't have the structuring, and they begin to understand in a certain way, sometimes it doesn't line up. Neither should it be only on the law, because of the flesh always wanting benefit from doing what's on the law, and they only expecting to receive. And when they don't get it, they cause wars. The Second World War was caused because of a non-related lineage of these Europeans. They went to Germany. Why they did not start up a tabernacle in there? Why they didn't start up a temple? No, they had synagogues, and granted, a lot of them were absolutely 100% faithful. But the great majority, they only want the benefits, they want the money, the power, the prestige. And caused the Second World War. So we must be very conscientious of reading Yeshayahu, the 11th chapter, in explaining very precisely where are these people coming from during the time of the restoration period. Yeshayahu the prophet speaks, they are coming from the north side of Egypt, the south side of Egypt, from Syria, and he gives you a list where his people and his lineage during this restoration period are located at. He is not talking of Europeans. So, because of the top of the pyramid is always scoundrelized, you don't find one person decent on top of the pyramid. What can you deduce? Those people who are below them, sometimes they are not given the facts. And there are always people outside of the top of the pyramid, they are acting righteously. Yet, when they don't have the spirit of Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, and Galah, that's the main distinction. Then they go by traditions. That's why the Mashiach was always explaining what you are saying is not part of what the Moses said on the law. Those were Takanot and Maasim. So that's the Yod-Heh Vav-Heh Ava, or Abba, speaking. He is lining up his people. Now they must be humble and understand the relationship with Yod-Heh Vav-Heh and Galah. But then there is another aspect that came out related with Europe and the great country of France. Came out on the BRICS Post. Very important news related with the Soviet Union or Russia, but the Soviet Union has returned. They are a bit disguised, but they are very strong on the path that they used to be previously. Only they are linked with the socialist group and also trade very strongly. And Mr. Putin, the president of the Soviet Union, had scheduled a visit to France, and this trip was postponed because of the talks of Syria. And believe it or not, they are going to participate and inaugurate a new Soviet Orthodox cathedral. Art exhibition in Paris, and the Kremlin confirmed that the visit was then postponed. Isn't that interesting? It was yesterday, the day before, even my own recordings explaining layers related with the European Union and the importance of the mediation of France and then the superpowers. Were not very many days afterwards, couple of days, the very most, and then there is the information in the newspaper. So when the spirit of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is relating with his people, then the information is truly given. So then, what is going on? They were going to participate in this inauguration of the Soviet Orthodox Cathedral. It is related with Christianity. Both nations are Christians. Now, there is a religio-political dynamic going on. France is going to lead the entire European section related with the Christian lineage. So, even mentioned before, General Berthier, the French general, they had put the Pope in prison, and the Pope died in prison, was then the horn that was removed from the head of the beast. So then, the Northern Kingdom, the Soviet Union, perceived a very strong position in the European Union, and they refused to go there because there is a mediation and it is related with religion. Now, the European section of it is very complex because it has portions of the Roman Empire, and it also has portions of a trade system and also portions of military, and these are combined. So then, because of the riches of Africa also playing a vital role in many decisions, in the importance of the trade of China. China leads the world at this point related with trade. There is no other kingdom or nation in this earth stronger than China. And every country must admit, so then they can bring a reality to their own sense of beings, so then they can understand what's going on with the events of the world. And the Yeshayahu the prophet, this great prophet, was always making mention of a place beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. He did understand that the Beit Yashurun, because the name of the city bears the name of the designer. So the name of the holy nation today is not the same name as was back then. So the name of the city must bear the name Yah. So then, because of the complexity of the European theater, when we read the Holy Instructions and understand the Apocalypse, we can then understand why then Yod-Heh Vav-Heh has set his holy hands of caring. Quote unquote, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh does not have hands. He's a powerful force. But let's say for the moment, so we can understand a fatherly figure, though we don't treat him or this powerful force as such, but to make it simpler, a very caring force. Reading them from these holy instructions and revelation, we find then that this very particular postponing shows us the power of France as it was during the time of General Berthier. Now, the religious aspect, the Soviet Union won't be as strong as in France. The Soviet Union is going to be purely military. They have their beliefs, but it won't overpower the European Union. In fact, the religious aspect of the Soviet Union is going to be directly linked with Europe. And it's not coming from the Vatican. Because Daniel 11 gives us a few clues of reminiscences of the great period of the Roman Empire. It's a form of. The Hebrew text already given you, it's not the total, but a portion of it, a similitude. Now, if the Roman Empire is taken over, that's not only reminiscences. So then France is bringing a balance, as it brought a balance when they had put the Pope in prison. And this great balance brought by France is then being played as we understand the mediation that France is having with the great powers. But the spiritual renewal of Europe is directly related with this particular mediation, bringing then balance as it did during the time of General Berthier. It's very incredible the amount of instances it repeats itself. Now, not talking about repeats itself as being equal as it was, but a similitude. So then the structuring of the Vatican or Italy or Rome is going to be shaped by France, because it is an outside power not directly related with the Roman Empire, yet they have reminiscences. So then the words spoken of by Daniel then obviously is related with the identification that Daniel showed or shew. So very important information, because they had the objective of inaugurating a new Soviet Orthodox cathedral. So the aim of the visit was a religious link. But because of the military force of the Soviet Union, described by Daniel, the 11th chapter, and speaks then in 7th verse, then the Netzer from the Gentile lineage, you find then the religious aspect, the Soviet Union won't influence Europe. But the military power does. Because 7 verses later you find in the kingdom of the north later on coming with much equipment and explaining very precisely military equipment, but not the religious aspect. And in fact, when Europe is reorganized in a religious aspect, then the religious aspect of the Soviet Union is going to be lined up with Europe, amazingly. But the power of influence and the military is solely on the Soviet Union. They have their own ways of dealing with the world from their military perspective. And the primary objective is protecting China in its trade. So then, these are great news, and it's very comforting because this was explained a few days ago, and today we find this information, and wonderful knowing the prophecies and understanding that these particular visit that was obviously related with religion, but France wanted a mediation being spoken of by the great military powers. So you already find a clash of dynamics from both countries. Now the whole situation in the hands of France at the moment. The scripture, as we can read from the Hebrew text, as much as we can read what signifies, is very silent related with the steps of a formation of these religious renewal of Europe. It truly doesn't say much. It does speak of a great influence coming from these reminiscences of the great Roman Empire. It does. But does not speak or indicate in its totality. Mussolini tried. He couldn't do it. So if there were ever a time in history that was given the Roman Empire a chance of re-establishing itself in its total state, was during the time of the Second World War. And Mussolini proved to be a very weak and disorganized leader. The Italian forces, they were no match. So then the English beat them up real badly. In Northern Africa, they were obviously kicked out of there. The Germans had come around on their aid. So Italy and the Roman Empire, they won't ever return. Only the remnants of it. yet led by another nation. So because of the importance of this topic, and understandably must have steps of formation of this period of time, and these steps of formation are shown in Revelation or then the Apocalypse. Notably, Revelation is not in chronological sequence. Now the Greco people did the best they could to get the documents translated, but there came a point to what document comes first. They trying to do what normal nations do, and do this by chronological order. The only problem is the original people from Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, they were taught not from chronological order. They were taught by what the feasts dictated. That's how you read the holy manuscripts. But because they didn't have the knowledge of it, they did the best they could. And it was translated halfway decent. But when the layers they became placed on paper, they didn't match. Not even remotely. Now, they didn't do it on purpose. So then, Revelation. What does it say related with then the restoring of the European Union religious-wise? So then, a point of reference, though the scripture they do not give us the details, but because of the intricacies of the facts previously and the repetition of these steps of formation, it wouldn't take much for a person to consider the main facts previously during the time of General Berthier and the events that went forward from then on, and then the events that France is mediating at the moment. May not be exactly what it was, but we find some understanding of the steps of formation from back then. So the spirit of prophecy always gives us flexibility, yet a very sharp mind, so some of these events then can be lined up with the holy instructions. And these are then obviously what the prophets spoke of. So, very interesting. So, then the French government made it known to the leader of the Soviet Union that if he comes to Paris, then the president of France would not participate with him in any ceremonies. So France is already showing its power of making decisions. But then France is ready to continue the dialogue on Syria. Now if you read Yeshayahu, the 11th chapter, you find Syria. Now, isn't that amazing? After so many centuries, and some of his people are located in Syria. Then Mr. Putin then decided to postpone the visit. So the situation of this visit by either side being postponed gives us a few clues of the steps of formation. Now obviously, if you're going to visit a country, you're going to participate in certain religious aspect, then the representative of this country, if it does not go along while you are visiting his country, would be very awkward. So that's why Mr. Putin decided to postpone. So, what can we understand from what the Hamashiach ben Yosef spoke on the 24th chapter of Metucheyahu? Believe it or not, the Hamashiach ben Yosef gave us a structuring understanding from the prophets. You find there in Yeshayahu, you find there in Yirmiyahu and Daniel, because the spirit of prophecy was at work in the life of the Hamashiach ben Yosef. Now, when we consider these many aspects and events and steps of formation, we find then, very importantly, a fact that we should always be searchful and receiving relationship and receiving teachings from the Holy Instructions. Receiving understanding from relationship and from the instructions. Now, should we have a priority over the other? No. Because we couldn't have a relationship with the divine without the ABCs of His holy instructions. Now came a point in life, in the history of humanity, that these instructions were learned in a certain way that became apart from a relationship. True? So both of them are important. The reason why the holy instructions were given, it's because the divine decided of having a relationship with those whom He was making a choice. If you don't have a relationship with the divine, you can't have instructions. The period of the nation during the Second Temple period was the darkest period of the nation. There was no relationship with Yod He Vav He. Many manuals, magazines, articles, they revealed the Ark of the Covenant was not in the Second Temple period. The only thing they had was the promised prophecies spoken of by those prophets whom they murdered. So then, should we be judgmental? No. Because Yod He Vav He provided space for those who are coming in the knowledge of His relationship. Those entering in relationship with Yod He Vav He, they have certain obligations, and every nation is adopted by Him as long as His holy instructions is then studied purposes of relationship. So Yod-Heh Vav-Heh said very clearly, he then receives any person from any nation, as long as they have a desire for relationship with him and his holy instructions. Otherwise, the holy nation becomes a secular nation. Buddhism, they have their own set of rules. Hindus, they have the whole set of rules. So what does it make the holy nation distinct from the others? It's a relationship with the divine, the designer. Now if you watch, for instance, the Indian people, they have darker skin. Does it not give you a few clues from where they come from? Not implying any extra information, only saying because of what Revelation was speaking of, then those people with the bronze colored skin. You find Northern Africa, for instance, the tribe of Dan went to Ethiopia, Sudan. The only distinction from any other nation and the holy nation is the relationship with the designer. Without being judgmental, not giving the forward motion to either of them. Only saying that Yod-Heh Vav-Heh said, do not, under any condition, put a heavy burden on the foreigners. Don't persecute the foreigners. Because you were foreigners in Mitzrayim, or the land of Egypt. Remind yourself where you come from. Being the original people or being a foreigner. The holy instructions are for both. So each of us should learn more. There are some people who have the great benefit of being born in certain languages, and they have a chance of teaching others. But always in line with the words of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. Yod-Heh Vav-Heh in his holy instructions said, do this way. Or no, do this way. Related with this topic, do this way. So when Yod-Heh Vav-Heh said he is our shield, that's the reason why. Because Yod-Heh Vav-Heh Jireh, he always provides. And he is, or his great presence, the presence of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh Jireh is very strong. Galah is very strong. Yeshua is very strong. Ava is very strong. Gibor is very strong. As long as each person is then humble before his presence, then he can work every situation. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.